Hey, I'm Johnny Ragin. I'm a mixing and mastering engineer based here in Atlanta, Georgia. Today, we're going to be breaking down a drum mix with Josh Manuel from Issues. We're going to be taking a deep dive into this drum mix, and I'm going to show you exactly how I approach processing on a mix like this. So if you want to get absolutely massive drum tones, pay attention to this. It's going to be really fun. Let's get started. All right, so today we're mixing Josh's drum playthrough for Here's to You off the beautiful Oblivion record, and I thought this would be like a really good one to start with because the song absolutely slaps. It's incredible, and it has a bunch of different parts in it, so we kind of get to like show a range of like drum styles and how I'll show you how I mix and approach each one of those as kind of these song sections happen. So just kind of give you like an overview of what's going to be going on. If you haven't watched Josh's drum playthrough, you should go do it. It's incredible. It's on the YouTube channel. But here's a little taste, kind of like where we'll get to in the mix. Let's check this out. So it's got like huge parts like that. It also has this like kind of Anderson .Paak sort of thing at the beginning. Check this out. So we're gonna figure out how to approach that, as well as a couple other different sections that really kind of show off some different stuff. So let's talk a little bit about how these drums were recorded, because that is gonna set up a lot of what we do for our mixing process here. I think one of my biggest pet peeves, honestly, is when someone shows like a tutorial video or whatever, and it's like the drums already sound so amazing, you know, like right out of the box, that there's like not much you have to do to make them sound great. And in this case, we're dealing with what I would say are just like very, very average drum tones. So these were recorded actually quite a few years ago, back in like Josh's old house in the basement. So if you watch the playthrough, you can kind of see the room that these are in and the miking setup and everything, but it's like, it's not crazy mics, it's straight into an interface, it's not really in like a super treated room. So it's really different from what you might expect in terms of demoing great drum tones, but I think it's really realistic in terms of what like we as, you know, mixers, producers actually have to work with. So we're gonna take something that sounds like pretty normal, you know, anybody can get these kind of drum tones and make them sound absolutely incredible. Now, obviously, one big part of this is that Josh's playing is fantastic, as always. So that certainly does help. The tuning is pretty good on the kit. But if we'll go through and listen to like all the source tones and everything, we'll kind of like take a look at where we started, and then we're gonna see where we end up and how we get there. So let's kind of take a look at where we started with this mix. Okay, so I've disabled all the plugins except for just a couple little like kind of final mastering plugins. And let's take a listen to what these drums started out sounding like. You'll kind of get to hear just the raw drum tracks here. Let's check that out. So they're not crazy, right? It's just kind of, it's like I said, very average drum tracks. And I think that's, you know, very close to what a lot of us kind of get on a regular basis. So we're going to talk about how to make these sound absolutely massive. I'm going to reactivate some plugins. We'll get into the mix. All right, so reactivated all the plugins. Let me show you kind of just where the drums are at, kind of at the end of the mix. And then we're going to kind of work backwards and see how we got there. So I've muted all the band tracks. Here are just the raw drums. Okay, so that sounded pretty great. Let's walk through inputs really quick. We'll kind of see what's going on with each one. So when Josh sent me these tracks, he's got kick in, kick out mic. I think it was something like a Beta 91, maybe a Beta 52 on the outside. I think he's using mostly Shure mics at the time. I'll have to double check on that. We got snare top, which I think was a 57. Now, interestingly, we didn't get a snare bottom. And that's something we're going to talk about in a minute, of kind of how I like recreated a snare bottom for it, as well as some like snare room tracks to really fill things out. As you'll see, like it sounds pretty small without that kind of stuff. So that was a big part of like getting these drums to sound really nice and big. Then we're moving into, he's got 4 toms, and I think those are also all with Shure mics. And then coming down to cymbals, all we had were hats and a pair of stereo overheads. You'll notice I've got a room track. It's actually, I'm kind of faking it. I'm gonna show you how to do that as well, because there weren't any room mics recorded with it. So I kind of had to take something from the overheads and sort of turn it into like a pseudo room track to fill things out. And in the final mix, it really ended up like helping a lot with that. So I think it's a pretty great thing to know how to do. So we'll start with the close mics and then kind of work our way through, and we'll kind of like listen to everything, see how we got there. So let's start with the kick drum and just kind of see where we're at on that. Let's pop over to our mixer view. Let's take a look at what's going on here. So the way that I like to set this up is I've got a kick folder, like it's a routing folder in Pro Tools, and then I have my kick in and kick out mics inside of that. So I'm doing just a little bit of processing to each of those on their own, and then both of those tracks are going to go into a kick, almost like a group channel. It's a group routing folder, which has got like a gate on it. It does have trigger on there. We'll be blending in some samples, and then a little more EQ, some automated EQ, R-bass. We'll get to all that. So let's take off everything here and just listen to let's do our kick in mic first. Okay, so it sounds pretty good. Definitely some bleed going on there, even on the kick in mic. Let's hear the kick out. Okay, so that one is not my favorite, and I still did end up using a bit of it. You'll see it's kind of blended in trigger here, but let's kind of talk about the kick in mic first. That one's kind of the more important one to what we'll be doing. So for this, also one really important thing to know, whenever you're dealing with, especially like a kick in and kick out mic, you need to make sure that the phase relationship between those mics is correct. So what'll happen is you'll have a mic on the inside and then a mic on the outside, and they're slightly, out of phase with each other just because one of them is closer inside the kick than the other. So you may have to nudge that kick out forward a little bit. You just zoom in on the waveform and look at that. In fact, we can kind of check that right now. So what I would do is just kind of zoom in like this. It doesn't have to be like exactly perfect, but you're looking for something like this where you make it big. You're like, okay, it's going, it's going up at the same time. It's kind of going down at the same time. We're maintaining that phase coherency with those two inputs. So that's really what I'm looking for there. And then the way I'm gonna approach this for this particular kick, if you listen to it without the EQ, you'll notice it's already like pretty nice and like kicky, like impact sounding. So here it is with the EQ off. So it's already like sounding pretty good. I felt like it just needed a little bit of kind of some low mid reduction here. It's right around 134, and then a little bump in the lows here just to fill things out. I did end up throwing a low cut filter on there, and I don't think that's doing anything. We'll probably just delete that. Probably all these are not really doing much. I'll tend to experiment a little bit with EQ. I'll throw a band on there and sort of bump it up and down and see if it works. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Anyway, let's listen to what this sounds like with the EQ. So what I'm really trying to do there is like focus that low end. I'm kind of taking out what's going to be like sort of the second harmonic of the kick drum. Let's listen to that just on its own. So once we zip that out of there, it really kind of clears up the low end and makes it like tighter and punchier. Let's turn it on and off real quick. It's pretty subtle, honestly, for such a big cut, but I feel like it really just kind of focuses everything up in the mix. So I'm a big fan of that. On the kick out mic, what I decided to do is basically kind of turn it into like a sub kick. I really wasn't a fan of kind of the original sound, which was like this. Just kind of like, it's sort of flubby a little bit. I'm not sure exactly what was going on there, but I was like, okay, this could actually be used as a sub kick. So I did just a high pass and a low pass filter, just to kind of center it around the fundamental frequency of the drum, and ended up with something like this. If you're not listening on like headphones or maybe a slightly better speaker system, you might not be able to hear that. But it's just kind of just this nice little sort of sub, like 50, 60 hertz kind of impact there that I can use and blend in as needed. So once I had those together, we ended up with something that sounds like this. Which is honestly like pretty good. I do think though that it needs a little silencer on it. This thing is absolutely magic if you've not messed around with this. So this is Black Salt Audio, some really good dudes over there. And they make this plugin. It's a gate, but it's like more than that. I don't know exactly what is going on under the hood, but it sounds really incredible. So here's what happens when we turn that on, just doing some reduction, keeping the length pretty long. I don't want to like go too crazy on it. Actually, no debleeding, so just using the reduction. Let's check this out. And yeah, it totally cleans it up. It's crazy. So yeah, love that plugin. Then here's where we get to trigger. All right, so here's where we get to talk about all this fun stuff with Josh's new sample library, which I helped record, and I mixed all the process samples in it. So if you think it sounds cool, I am super honored by that. I think it sounds pretty cool, and I hope you do too. So what I've got going on here is we've got a blend. So this is his SJC kit, and I basically took all the inputs from that and blended them together in Trigger, just because I knew I kind of wanted them all to live together on this one track. And so we've got as a kick in, a kick out, a kick sub, an overhead channel, and a room channel. And so I went ahead and just used the processed samples on here because it's kind of mixed like how I enjoy hearing those channels, so it just kind of saves some time. However, the pack does come with all the unprocessed raw samples as well, so it's really easy to make them sound exactly like what you want. So here's kind of what each of those sounds like. Here's the kick in. Super nice and punchy. Kick out. That's what I like a kick out to sound like. It's still got some like impact and punch to it, but a little more like just some more bloom to the decay. Got a kick sub. That's kind of like a Yamaha sub kick sort of deal. Then we have our overhead channel, which sounds super nice and smacky. That's a really cool one. I think kick in the overheads and rooms is sort of underrated. So I like to blend that in. And here's the room channel. So all that together is going to sound something like this. Really nice. And obviously, if you want to like tighten that up, make it not as roomy sounding, Josh really likes some room sound in it, so that's why I kind of like blended it like that. You could just mute these and like you'll get a super tight, direct, punchy kick. So really whatever like kind of the flavor is that you're going for, this is going to get you there. So I blended this pretty heavily. I liked the consistency that I could get with this, and it just kind of served the song really well. I was trying to figure out how to use these mics, and it ended up just like sounding more like Josh's kit to just sort of use the sample. I like the tuning on it a lot. So ultimately, that's kind of where I went with that, and then did just a little bit of additional processing on it, which I'll show you now. So the first thing is I wanted a little more low end and a little bit less high end. The main reason for that is because of the amount of rooms and overhead that I'm blending in. I wanted to still like get the air from that without having too much like clickiness to it. So I probably wouldn't have had to have done that if I didn't blend in so much of those room samples. I think we're getting a lot of high end from that, plus the original kick. So Josh really likes a lot of kind of the roomy sound to it. So that's kind of, I chose to blend them all that way, and then ended up kind of taking out a little bit of that to compensate for how much of those rooms I was blending in. And then I just want to thicken it up a little bit in the low end, kind of bring everything together with the bass tone especially. This song has got like so much groove to it. I just felt like it needed a little bit more low end. This is an automated EQ that we'll get to in a minute during certain sections of the song. Then we've got one of my favorite little kind of mix tricks here, which is R-bass. R-bass is awesome. It basically is like a sub-harmonic generator for low frequencies, and it works great on a kick like this. So let's kind of listen in, see what it sounds like. Here it is, off. And on. So yeah, it really just kind of rounds out the low end of the kick and kind of like tightens everything up. I think it also like, it affects the way that the kick interacts with like the bus compression later on down in the chain, which we'll get to. But yeah, there's something there that just really works on a kick like this. You'll notice we've got the frequency dialed in right around the fundamental frequency of the kick, and I'm blending like just a little bit of that sub into there. Okay, so that takes us through kick. Let's move on to everybody's favorite, the snare. So for this song, Josh is using his signature snare. I think it's made of copper. Sounds really huge. He also had it tuned pretty high, which we'll kind of hear in a second here. I'm going to mute all these samples for now. We'll get to all those in a minute. So let me show you kind of just what we started with here. I'm going to make all this stuff inactive. And let's listen to our snare top. So that sounds really good. It's tuned fairly high, but fortunately we got samples that are going to match that. So that's a big part we'll get to later. The first thing I noticed though was the amount of bleed that I was getting. So I ended up using another instance of silencer from Black Salt, and it did a killer job kind of just like filtering some of that out. So that really made it feel great. I will say this, another hugely overlooked part of a really good drum mix is automating stuff like gates. So for example, in this section, it's kind of like a breakbeat section almost, where it does this. And you'll notice that I'm automating, what all this automation lane is doing is automating off and on this ghost function, which is going to let a bunch of those ghost notes through when we need them. So that was really important, like to getting all the nuance of the playing. And you'll notice that I've got that on all the samples as well. That was kind of a strategic thing to do with letting just the right amount of the drum through to trigger the sample like super accurately. Didn't want to have any like misfires or anything like that, especially on like a complicated drum part, and obviously a drum playthrough. It's really important that the drums, are not like getting any mishits or anything like that with the sample. So moving on. We have an instance of Kirchhoff EQ. Let's check that out. So the big thing here, I'm taking out some of these sort of resonances, kind of the low mid-range. There's one right around like 350, and then kind of a bigger cut, like a 6.5 dB cut at around 469. Nice. And then just a bump right here at the fundamental frequency of the drum. So what that's going to do is really kind of like raise the impact of the drum. Let's hear that off and then on. See how it's suddenly like, oh, like that is a snare drum. It's not, there's no like muddiness to it. It's not getting lost in its own overtones. That's really what we're going for there. Just trying to kind of clean that up, make sure that everything in the drum is like speaking clearly, especially as it gets blended with samples and, the rest of the mics on the kit. We're going to hear a lot of that drum. So we needed to sound really clear and be able to cut through everything else. Moving on from that, we've got the classic MH Channel Strip 3. Now, we all love Nolly. Let's just admit it. He came up with an amazing thing here on this plugin with kind of really smacking that Mio compressor with like a 25 millisecond attack, 120 millisecond release. Digs in like maybe like 6 dB. We'll see what we get on here. It just gives that like nice smacky pop to it. There's nothing like quite like it. Let's hear what it does. That just feels really, really good. Then we've got one. This is a plugin that I had seen Eric Valentine using, and using it on a drum mix I really liked, and I was like, man, I need to open this thing up. So it's the Psyche, I don't know. It's from Sound Toys. It rocks. So I'm boosting lows and highs about 3 dB with each, and I'm using the drive control to add some saturation, about 3 dB on that as well. So here's what that sounds like. Kind of brings back a little bit of the top end that maybe we're losing from the compression earlier. So it just keeps it really nice and punchy. Then we get into samples. All right, so this is where it gets really fun. So I've got some goals with these samples, and whenever I'm using samples to augment a drum tone, I'm never just like throwing a bunch of samples on there and just kind of like messing around. I've always like got an intention with it, and in this case, I was going for clarity and punch. So obviously, the original recording only had a single snare mic, so that's a little bit of a tough position to be in. We didn't have a bottom snare mic, and yet we have like a bunch of ghost notes and stuff that we need to be able to hear those articulations. So I was really trying to get some clarity, especially in those ghost notes with this bottom snare mic. The top one is really getting some more punch and impact, and then we've got a overhead and a room, which are getting like just the bigness, like the width of that snare. So let's go ahead and take a listen to what each of those are doing. All right, so the first one up is going to be our snare top trigger. So on all these, you'll see I've got like all the samples loaded up. I just have only got one that's unmuted. So in this case, it's the top process sample. It sounds like this. So that sounds really nice, and maybe even more importantly, it matches the tuning of Josh's drum in the recording. So that's a huge thing that people overlook, is the tuning of the sample compared to the tuning of the actual drum. I cannot tell you how many times somebody will like send me a mix and be like, what's going on with it? And it's like they're like the fundamental frequency of their recorded drum versus what they want to use as a sample is like super off from each other, and so it just will conflict. The harmonics kind of don't line up, the fundamentals will fight with each other, and you end up with a mix that instead of sounding like a really punchy snare drum, you end up with a really muddy snare drum. So I picked the sample. We have like a low, medium, and high tuning on this drum, and so I picked the high one, which is normally not like my favorite tuning, but it's the one that really matched what Josh was doing, and I think like in the context of the mix, it works really, really well. So with that, I also wanted to grab a little more of that fundamental frequency. So with that, you can tell it just kind of beefs it up a little bit. Just like that. Feels really nice. I did a very similar thing across all of these. So you'll notice, so this is the snare bottom. It has got the basically almost the exact same EQ. We've got the overhead trigger has got even more of it boosted, like almost 7 dB of boost on that. That's something really cool that you can do with like good samples, is you can pull up the room mics and use them kind of in a way that like wouldn't work if it was an actual overhead or room mic. You can like boost, certain like fundamental frequencies of drums individually and make them sound like just the best possible version of those room and overhead inputs, and do it all kind of independently. Then there's a similar thing going on with our room, except I'm also boosting kind of some of that like sort of that barky frequency. We'll get to that in a minute as we listen to it. But just so you know, those EQs are happening on these triggers. So snare bottom sounds like this. Sounds really good. That really like totally made up for not having an actual bottom snare mic. I ended up just not missing it at all. We recorded so many round robins for this snare, so many different articulations. It just fit right in and sounds like incredibly natural. Same thing with overhead. Here's how that sounds. Like that just sounds so good. It adds so much width to it. Really makes things jump out. Same thing with the room. Like that, God, that sounds freaking massive. That's where like a ton of the big snare tone is coming from. You'll see that as we kind of blend everything together. That's like really being responsible for a lot of what you're liking about that snare drum. So now, blended together, all those are going to sound something like this. It's thick, it's meaty, even for like a higher tuned snare. I think that's kind of what I was really trying to get out of this snare, was like, I want it to be, it's tuned high and I want to like respect that, but I also want it to not sound like, I don't know, like the 311 snare, you know? Not that it's tuned like anywhere close to that high, but I didn't want to get that like pingy sort of sound too. I want to have like good punch and impact, even though it's tuned fairly high. So now on the snare bus, we've got a few other things here. We've got another instance of this psych EQ, doing a little more work in the mids this time. A little bit of low, a little bit of high, but a lot of this mid, a lot of this 1.5. Let's hear what that does. Turn it off. So that's really getting something magic there. There's just kind of that like barky like impact to it. It really just makes the drum like speak and like jump out of the speakers in the mix. It's something that sounds maybe even a little bit weird on its own, like maybe a little too like abrasive on its own, but in context, it sounds really cool. Then I want to hit the samples with a little bit of that same EQ from the Metric Halo strip. So I'm doing a little bit of the same thing, not getting like as much gain reduction on that, but it's literally the exact same settings, doing the exact same thing. Then this guy, R-Bass, again, my favorite little plugin here. So in this case, I've got the frequency set up at 225, which is about the fundamental frequency of that snare. And I'm blending in just a little bit of that low, like sub-harmonic, again, just to make the snare feel like weightier and bigger, even though we're in a higher tuning. So let's start with that off and then I'll turn it on. It just like the movement of the drum changes in a really cool way that just makes it like just like punch out of the speakers. I love what this does on snare. Like super underrated plugin, I think. And this guy, I think, is just using it for the analyzer. So this is kind of what the overall curve looks like. Just kind of see if there's anything like sort of jumping out at me there. So you can see that fundamental really coming through strongly there. All the samples are reinforcing that. So everything kind of just lines up and feels really good together on that snare. Okay, now last but not least on snare, we have got this little side stick channel. So this only happens at the very beginning of the song. There's a little side stick part. I moved it to a separate channel so I could process it a little bit differently. We again have some silencer on there, as well as this massive chunk with Pro Q3. I really wanted like the stick impact and a lot of the high end to like speak through on that. Let's listen to that kind of in context here. So yeah, I just kind of found weird that like resonant frequency like of the stick hitting the side of the rim was, and sort of just emphasize that as well as adding some top end to it. So let's move on. I think at this point I want to start hearing stuff in context, especially as we get into toms. So let's go ahead, let's kind of hear where we're at now. So we got some hats. I'm really not doing anything to them. They sound like this. And as you hear, they are barely in the mix at all. And that's kind of by design. I was getting what I needed out of the overheads and this fake room track that we'll talk about in a minute. So these overheads sounded really nice. I just want to kind of brighten them up a little bit, add a little bit of excitement to it. Here's how they started. So really solid. First thing I added was the trusty old SSL channel strip 2, adding a little bit of high end, like around 12K, just getting some sizzle going in there. Cutting out just a little bit of like 600 hertz. That's kind of where like kind of the woolly frequency of cymbals is. And I just felt like that was kind of muddying things up a little bit. So I pulled that out just a hair. Let's hear what that sounds like as we turn it on. Not doing anything too crazy. Next up is this Universal Audio 1176. I really like this anniversary edition one. On this one, I'm going attack and release basically as fast as they'll go. I'm really trying to like clamp down on the snare. So check out what that does. Now, you might be thinking like, oh, Johnny, we've got, like the crazy fast attack. It's going to just like squish everything. And it does a little bit, but the reality is if you're using something like an 1176, even if you turn it to slow, it's still really, really fast. There's no such thing really like on a FET compressor like this as slow. So you might let a little more of the transient through, but for me, I'm looking more to just kind of even stuff out with this, and I think that serves the mix a little bit better in this particular case. Also worth noting, I'm doing this at like a 2-to-1 ratio, so I'm not like getting like 3 dB of compression, so it's not like going crazy, and I think that also helps with using the really fast attack and release. Next up after that is another instance of this Kirchhoff EQ, and again, I'm shaping this a little bit like I did with that snare, where I'm emphasizing sort of the fundamental of the snare. I'm cutting out some of the kick, like just like really like subby lows. That's going to get muddy. Now you'll notice I'm not doing the thing where we, like go like way up to like, 300 hertz with our low cut filter here. I don't like how that sounds. Like overheads are not just cymbal mics. They are going to capture a lot more than that, and they should capture a lot more than that. So to me, it's worth it to leave that stuff in. And, maybe you do get like some of like kind of the low fundamental of the kick just a little bit before that roll off happens. You're getting the impact of the snare. It's not just the washiness of the cymbals. I think that sounds really good. So then I've got these two little dips sort of in the mids and upper mids. This is to take care of some cymbal resonance and just kind of like some harsh abrasive tones in the cymbals. And then this was sort of digging out a little bit of kind of the like the clacky, like knocky tone in the snare. I like that tone, but I like it to come from the direct snare mics and samples more so than from the overheads. So I'll bypass that and then enable it so you can hear what's going on with that. And again, just like adding that one EQ move right here just really brings clarity and consistency to that fundamental of the snare. Now, I mentioned earlier that we didn't have any room mics set up at this time, so I had to fake it. And this is something that ends up happening a lot. Like smaller bands, they are not having like just, some massive space to record in. So we're going to go in and we're going to make it sound like there's a bigger space than there actually is by faking a room. And the way that I like to do this is with the Universal Audio Ocean Way plugin. Let me disable this other stuff. So we started, so this is an exact copy of the overheads. So I just duplicated the overhead track, and that is what has become the room. So I've got this in, actually in reverb mode. I felt like that sounded a little bit better. And it's wet soloed, so all you're hearing is the wet signal. So check out what this sounds like. Like, you could absolutely convince me that that's a real room sound. It sounds really, really good. I think better than it has any right to, really. So then I really like to smack this with a distressor, just get that really nice, like, punchy, pumpy kind of thing going on. Let's hear what that does. Yeah. That's really cool. So with that, attack on 8, release on like 2.5, input just dimed at 10, output kind of down to compensate. And you know, you can experiment. So like you can do the whole, you can do like the nuke thing. Hit the right button. It sounds like this. So to me, like that's a little bit too much. I'll even sometimes use like 2-to-1, 3-to-1 on that. For me, there's something about the way the snare drum is hitting on 4-to-1 that I really like, so we're gonna leave it on that. And then finally, Pro Q3, this is where we're doing some work here. So in this case, I didn't want to hear as much of that washy, like kind of tubby, low frequency stuff. So especially because I've got those kick triggers that are doing some work on rooms. So where we've got like that kind of thing going on. So I don't necessarily need a room kick tone. So I just decided to cut that out, boost a little bit of like right around 1K. So this is where you'll notice like I was taking out some of that stuff like close to 1K on the overheads, but then I'm adding it in the rooms because I don't want it to get overwhelming, and I liked that frequency range in the rooms more than I liked what I was hearing from that frequency range in the overheads. So let's see what that does. Let's turn that off. Yeah, that just sounds like a really dope room mic. So blend it in. We've got these together. I think that's about where I actually had it for the room and overhead balance, and then hi-hats are tucked down below that. So all of these are going into my little like cymbal group bus here, where they're getting treated with soothe. We've got the nollie setting. This is the cymbal soothe setting, and it's doing just a little bit. I think I actually backed off the depth a hair on it. So we're getting like, I mean, like a dB maybe. Let's see what it does. Yeah, kind of averaging like right around there. So really not doing a ton, and a very like detailed, like fast attack, fast release. And then after that, we have a little more work here. All right, so this is where I like to go in and do like slightly more surgical tweaking on all the cymbal mics together. So let's take this off for a second and listen to what's going on. And then we'll enable it. So it really focuses things. You'll notice it got a little softer. Don't let that fool you. I probably could have loudness matched that, but I think I kind of did it with the faders or bringing it up later. What I wanted to do there was to kind of take out some of the most aggressive parts, like especially of the crash. Let's get to like a bigger section here. You'll notice I've got a little bit of this dynamic range going on here, just like the tiniest little bit, digging out a little bit of these low mids here that just didn't feel like it kind of served the overall like picture of the drums I'm trying to create with these cymbal mics. And then these guys, check out how insane this is. So I'm gonna turn these off and then I'll turn them on and you're about to lose your mind. Check this out. So yeah, just like the most heinous overtone frequencies they were kind of cutting through there. And I think they might be like in sort of a harmonic series with each other. So it might be kind of like playing off of each other. But yeah, like when I first kind of was like bringing this mix together, I was like, man, something's just killing me in these overheads. So like when I got to this point, I was like, okay, I gotta find that immediately and take it out. And something like Soothe didn't really take care of. It needed a more drastic solution than that. So just like a gigantic like 16 and 30 dB cut. That's a little bit ridiculous, but that's what it took. Like you heard kind of the difference there. It really tamed those frequencies. So if you hear something like that, don't be afraid to take it out. But at the same time, don't be obsessed with frequency hunting. That's something that I think trips a lot of guys up. You'll try to like start notching out every single little like whistle that you hear. And it's like, well, at a certain point, you're just like, neutering your drums and your cymbals. So don't go like chasing every little thing. But if there is something like that where you hear like a really distinct whistle to it, you definitely want to take care of that, because you will hear that all the way through into like the final complete mix. Like nothing else is going to like cover that up when it's that severe. So now let's mix in our snare, kick, and overheads. I'm going to keep toms muted for just a sec. We'll get to those. Let's hear it all together where we're at so far. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Like you hear those little ghost notes popping through. I've like automated those. Yeah, so just sounding really cool. So now we need some toms, and we need them to sound really good. Let's find some of those, and we're gonna dive in here and hear what these sounded like before we went to work on them. We're gonna disable all this. The reason I'm making these inactive rather than just bypassing them is because a lot of this stuff does have some automation on it, which we'll get into shortly. There are a few sections of the songs where like different plugins are being like automated and like turning on and off, so it doesn't always work to just bypass them. So okay, check out these toms. Here's what we started with. Okay, it's not great. So we're gonna take these one at a time, and we're gonna do a lot of work on them. Specifically, we're gonna pull up some samples that are gonna sound really, really nice in this mix. So first, the very first thing I needed to do was I knew I needed to cut out a bunch of this bleed that's happening. It's like kind of insane. Like you hear that resonance that's happening just like continuously. Like the tom it's resonating. It's probably didn't have like a ton of dampening or anything on it, which is fine. But we need to take care of that and not have that come through. So we need them to sound a lot more controlled. So again, blacks out silencer, cuts out all that stuff, and gets us. Okay, it's a less than pleasing tom sound, but we can work with it. We can get this into something that's going to sound really good. I'm going to go ahead. Let's enable silencer on all of these, so you'll kind of hear what the toms were sounding like just raw. So it's something like this. Okay, so that's sounding fine. It's really that first one that just had a weird kind of resonance to it that I wanted to take care of. So we're going to deal with that one first. We are going to load up a trusty old trigger, and we're going to get into all of Josh's toms, which sound just so good. So let's listen to each of these. So here is our this is our rack tom 1. There are 4 toms in this kit. And yeah, rack tom 1, these are all the process samples. Keep in mind you also get them raw. So here's the top. So that just sounds unreal. That's like, man, it's just like the tuning is like super dialed in, sounds incredible. Now, the other thing that we're giving you the sample pack that I'm not sure any other sample pack has, like somebody correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but we did a tom bottom mic. And this is a trick that the dudes who run the studio that we recorded at, Kenneth Mount and Zach Onum, they do this, and it sounds really good. It captures a lot of the resonance and the decay of the drum. So check out what this sounds like. I'm gonna turn it up so you can hear it a little bit better. So it's like a ton of sustain, but it also has a lot of attack to it as well. It's a really interesting thing. And we did that with like I think it was a C414 on it. And it just somehow, like together, sounds really, really nice. We also have an overhead with that and a room. And together, they'll sound like this. Like seriously, one of my favorite sounding just tom sets overall. Just really sounds incredible. Okay, so let's continue on. Let's explore a little bit just kind of what these samples are sounding like. I'm gonna make all these active. I want to show you these because like these toms just sound so good. So yeah, here is Rack Tom 2. And together, sounds so weighty and beefy. Here's first floor tom. Like, tell me that doesn't sound massive. Oh my God. And then, yeah, together. Yeah, that just, man, that sounds good. So Josh tunes that floor tom a little more like just kind of like dead loose, which is a very cool effect. It sounds massive, like just like thunderous in the mix. So then for each of these, I'm using really the exact same processing. I'm using Saturn 2. I think it's going to have almost the exact same settings on every single one of these. This is another trick that I stole from Eric Valentine, who is super good. And what he does is he'll create 3 frequency bands. So if you don't know what Saturn 2 is, it's awesome. It's a multi-band like distortion overdrive kind of processor. But what's cool is you can like select different settings for each of the bands. So like you can do like this one's like gentle saturation. The lows are like this warm tape. You can adjust like the drive for each one of them. And it's an incredibly powerful frequency shaping tool. And especially on toms, it just kind of allows you to like dial stuff in and like sort of balance the ratio of like low to high and mid in your tom. So let's kind of hear, I'll play this through triggers so you just kind of hear what it's doing. Out the just like the bigness even of like that smaller rack tom. Here's the second rack tom without Saturn, with Saturn. Then tom 3, and tom 4. So yeah, it adds something really cool to it. I really like doing that. And then on each of these, I think I've got a Pro Q doing absolutely nothing. I'll have that on there just sometimes it's like sort of an analyzer just to kind of make sure that I'm like not missing anything. I'll kind of just double check it. You know, it's like you don't want to mix with your eyes, but also, you know, you got your eyes and they can be helpful in certain instances, and this is one of them for me. So all together, let's listen to a little bit of a tom part here. Let's see, plays one more. Yeah, I mean, like, really, what else do you want toms to sound like? That sounds incredible. Now, the other thing that's going to make a lot of these drums come to life is some reverb. So that's going to bring us down here to our drum effects, which we've had muted up until now. I have 2 drum verbs on. I've got kind of a room verb that I'm using Valhalla Vintage Verb for. And then I've also got CLA Epic on his snare top preset, which I found is really nice. It's got all the delay stuff. This does delay and reverb. It's got all the delay stuff muted, so it's just a reverb, and it just sounds really nice. I mean, it's crystal algae, so it should sound nice. And yeah, so those together, let's listen to like those toms with some verb on it. So like it's subtle, but it's making a pretty big impact difference, like the space. We'll get more to that as we listen through everything together now. I think we've worked through, yeah, kick, snare, toms, and cymbals for this one. We've just introduced our drum effects, and then we'll get into the bus here in a second and kind of how it all comes together. Let's go ahead and just listen to kind of where we're at with this. Yeah, that sounded really good. I'm really happy with it. So now I've got two sort of drum bus situations going on here. First one, you'll see that all these routing folders, kick, snare, and toms, are all going to KST, which stands for kick, snare, toms. And on that one, I'm doing some fairly aggressive moves. The first thing on there is this Chandler Limited Zener limiter, which is very cool. It is very aggressive, but it makes stuff punch, like especially these close mics. So let's mute the cymbals and let you hear what this sounds like. So here it is off. And this is one where I've discovered the gain reduction meter is lying to you. Like you'll notice it was moving like what looked like just a dB or two, but I feel like it sounds like a lot more than that. It really kind of brings out the punch in the kit. Then the second thing that's going on is going to be virtual mix rack. This is kind of another like Nolly thing where I've got a distressor absolutely like just 20-to-1 ratio, just destroying it, but the mix is only like 21%. I'm then hitting this FGN, kind of like a knee VQ, doing like plus 1.3 on that top band, boosting a little like 5.5K, just a hair. Nothing on this mid band, and just a tiny bit around 105. So here's what's interesting is this frequency is kind of right in between our fundamental frequencies of the kick and the snare. And so for me, what this does, and it is a shelf, so that's worth noting, it's boosting all the way down, but it really helps to tie together some of the kick and the snare elements together and kind of make that like very low midsection move as one unit. On top of that, we're boosting a little high end, it's a little more high end, so 12K up here with this custom series EQ, and then a trimmer just to make sure everything is sounding and coming through at the right level. Let's listen to that off. Yeah, so the main thing working there is that FG stress. If we were to turn this all the way up, it's going to sound like just insane like this. I mean, honestly, it sounds kind of awesome. I don't think we need that much of it, but mixed in subtly, I think that's a really cool effect. So then everything else, like the cymbal bus, the drum effects, and the kick, snare, tom bus, is going to go through into this overall drum bus. So I ended up experimenting a little bit with the Zener limiter again on this. I ended up deciding I didn't really like that a ton. But I did actually end up going and just copying over this drum bus processing again and just using that to fill out the entire drum bus, coupled with some Pro Q3 that looks a little weird. I did this, there are a few things going on. Let me bypass it. I'll show you how we got here. So here's what it sounds like off. So this is boosting like 4 really specific things. The first is like the exact fundamental of the kick drum down here right around 60 hertz. Second, I did this really interesting looking little boost down here. So what's going on here is that we've got so it's a bell curve, but it's doing 48 dB per octave. And what's cool about this is you can boost a very specific range and not affect the frequencies on either side of it as much. And so I did that right around where the snare is, because I wanted, like, since it's on the bus, there's like a lot of other stuff going around there. So I wanted to really like just affect that snare range a little bit and be able to like maneuver that up and down as needed without affecting anything else that was happening. Then up here, I felt like I just needed a little more bite and like pop to it. So I kind of dug in, it's like 1800 hertz, 1.8K, and kind of boosted a little bit with this like wider bell. I've got a shelf up here boosting a little more. This is all just trying to get things to pop, like cymbals, snare, kind of everything that's up there. Even like you'll get some like kind of the little bit like the click of the kick as well. That can kind of help with that stuff too. That's a little bit specific to this particular drum mix. So this is not something I do like on every drum mix, but it's a really useful tool to have, especially these two bands down here, so you can really adjust like how hard your kick and snare hit in the frequency spectrum rather than just like pulling the fader up and down. You can really emphasize like the impact of each of those drums very easily, rather than just like, is it louder, is it softer? It's like, is that particular frequency where like it impacts louder or softer? So it's almost like a fader for like the fundamental of the drum. Okay, so that takes us through everything on our way to our mix bus. So this is my just kind of like really typical mix bus chain. There's also a little instrument bus going on. We'll talk about that in a second here. So we're gonna bring in the other instruments now, which will be very fun. So the rest of the band mixed pretty evenly. These were unmastered stems, so I basically ran it through like what my master bus would be for like kind of just something quick like this, and we'll get into all of that. But first, everything's gonna hit the mix bus. So like, even though these are all like just stems, like it's basically, you know, it's kind of like consolidated down, you know, all the bass, all the like extra guitar, main guitar, and production, that's all in there. And so I'm basically treating it like I would if I was just actually mixing and like doing a quick master on it. So all the instruments, so drums and all the stems, are hitting a FG gray and the FG red. So the red is doing something very interesting. It is going to a 5-to-1 ratio, slow attack, fast release, and drive is turned up just a little bit. And you'll notice that it is going to absolutely pummel the mix. But the trick is, again, we've got the mix at like 25%, so it's not going to go as crazy. Over here on the gray, we're doing just kind of the typical Nolly thing. I feel like some people are doing this now. I'm not sure if it can like be called the Nolly thing anymore. But it's the fast attack, the 0.3 attack, and the fast 0.1 release. Threshold to where we're getting just like a few dB of reduction when the snare hits and just a couple when the kick hits. So let's check that all out together, see what that kind of looks like as it happens. Yeah, so this is going like absolutely nuts, getting like 5 to 7 dB of gain reduction, which is just insane. But again, it's only mixed at like 25%, so it's really just helping to add like some energy to it. This, just in case you're not familiar with this technique, what's going on here is that our entire like, in this case, like our instrumental bus is being run through this compressor, and when the snare hits, it pops it down really quick, like 3 dB. And what that does is, so I've got my snare turned up like fairly loud in the mix, like it would sound like it would really like poke out if I didn't have this compressor on, but because I do, it just kind of like bops it down whenever the snare hits, and it, because it's on the entire like instrumental bus, it's pushing the whole mix down every time that snare hits. And so that gives the appearance of the snare like really like just like reaching out and punching, but without actually like having it poke over the top of everything else the way that it would if I didn't have this on there. So like it knocks the whole mix down instead of just letting the snare pop out over top of everything. So after it hits that, we're going into a few things here. This is an instance of Slate VMR. Doing a little bit of gain structuring here. Some of their plugins will like artificially add some gain to it, make you think that things are hitting harder than they are when it's actually just getting a little bit louder. So you always want to watch that. I think this Bomber plugin like kind of especially does that. So I'm using Bomber, which is sort of a transient shaper. We'll kind of turn it off here and listen to it. And then Revival, which is just like kind of adding some shimmer and thickness. It's literally what the controls are called, and that is exactly what it does. Let's turn those off and we'll hear them, see what it does. So you can hear like just the impact coming from Bomber, and then just sort of like the shimmer and sheen coming from Revival. After that, we've got Gullfoss. This is something, actually this is what I'm really just experimenting with. I've seen a lot of people using it, and so I decided to try it out. And it actually works really good. So what this is doing is it's sort of like, it's trying to like move your mix into sort of a like a standardized frequency response curve. And you can control how much it does that and how aggressively and kind of what it's doing. But a lot of it is sort of like automated under the hood. So it's doing a little bit on this mix. You can tell, so the gray here is like kind of what it's trying to do. And obviously there's no audio playing, so it's not like, it's not doing anything. It's trying to just like go a little bit insane. When the mix starts, you'll see it kind of like level itself out, and we'll see what it's actually doing. Cool. So you can see it's kind of controlling some low end stuff, and it's also adding a little bit of high end. That's because I have this brighten turned on, and I really kind of like the way it does that. So it's boosting. It was only doing like you can see like the dB scale over here. It was like 2.5, 3 dB. The rest of it was not moving around a ton, which is a good sign that your mix is kind of where it needs to be. Like frequency balance wise, like if there were some like major issues in it, you would see like some big, it trying to make some big movements to compensate for that. But because the mix is already sounding good, it's not really doing a ton. It's just moving a couple, or even like quarter of a dB here and there just to kind of hold things together. Then going VTM. I'm using the FG456 tape. Sounds really nice and fat, and I've got it on the 1/2" 2-track, kind of the mastering setting. Normal bias, 30 IPS, so not too distorted. This is going to sound really subtle, but here's what it's doing. Here's off. Honestly, maybe not that subtle. To me, that really like brought the mix forward. Really made the bass hit. Like kind of just like I feel it in my sub a little bit more, which I'm really liking. So then next up is this thing called SSL. That is a hardware insert that is going to my SSL Fusion. I will put a picture of that in post so you can see what's going on there. But essentially, I've got kind of all the controls going on it. Drive and density are up a little bit. Adding a tiny bit of top end with the Violet EQ. I am doing a little bit of like stereo imaging over here. High frequency compressor is coming on like just the tiniest bit. It's honestly not making a huge difference in the mix. It's really just kind of one of those things where like I just have it on my mix bus. It just sort of lives there, and I like what it does. It's just kind of one of those things like it makes it sound, like 5% better. I'm using it very, very subtly. Next up, we have, maybe like one of my new favorite plugins. This is Gold Clip from Schwab. So this is supposed to be something like the circuitry of like a Lavery Gold converter, and like you can clip those converters. It's a lot of very, very excellent and well-known mastering guys will have those converters, and they basically just like make them clip, but they've they've designed this circuitry and this algorithm in such a way that it clips in a very pleasant way and can get things louder without it necessarily like sounding super clipped. So let's see what we're doing with that. So the answer is not much. You can see like the clipping was going over by like just 0.8 dB. So that is extremely subtle, not doing too much. There is this gold circuit, which sort of like, and it's Alchemy one as well. These are sort of like the Oxford inflator kind of thing where it's like it's bringing up some like lower level information. Let me go ahead and bypass it so you can hear what that's doing. So it's mostly adding gain. I'm adding like a little bit over 2 dB of gain, but then I'm activating these gold and alchemy circuits as well. They're doing just a little bit to lift those details up, which I think suits the mix really well. This one's got some really cool options on it. Like you can like change the box tone to be like classic, modern, or flat. So it's kind of like doing some different versions of these clipping circuitry. So like you got classic and modern on that, hard clipping. So that's where I thought it sounded good, and that's where I kept it. After that, I've got one of my favorite mastering tools, which is the NIF Audio Soma. This is from Plugin Alliance, and this EQ just sounds sweet. Like, there's something about the top end of this. The hardware unit is really the same way, and they've done a really good job of like capturing it in this plugin. So I've got all the bands doing a little bit here. Now keep in mind, this is gonna sound more dramatic than it looks, because it's like, you know, there's like a 3 dB boost at 3.9K, like a 1.5 dB at 2.2K, then a little bit of reduction around 220. I think I'm still hearing a little bit of those snare overtones with that. And then a quick little like 1.5 dB boost at 100. So that's like pretty subtle. However, because it's on the master bus, it's gonna sound pretty substantial. So here it is off. And on. Those are the kind of moves where you have to be really careful, because like it is tempting to be like, oh, 3 dB, that's nothing, and like just go ahead and like crank stuff. But like you want to be really, really subtle with this. I'm also using that as like a high shelf. The other ones are just bell curves. So you want to be careful with stuff like that, especially on the master bus, just being really conscious of how much you are doing to that signal. Keeping in with the theme of subtlety here, there's one more EQ. This is kind of like my final balance here. The main thing going on here, digging out a little bit of these like real not digging out necessarily, but I'm reducing and also shaping and trying to even out some of these really sub lows here. This is something that often gets overlooked, I think, in mastering, and something that I like to pay a lot of attention to. So down here, it's like I'm boosting like 26 hertz, like something you feel much more so than here, and then taking out a little bit of like the sub low of the kick drum around 36. So cumulatively, I'm getting this kind of curve to it that is sort of just functioning to even out some of those really, really low frequencies. Then at the top, we're getting this little like little bundle right here. I think I was really trying to create this curve. So it's got this little bump right here that's like very subtle. It extends really far down. There's like a super wide Q on a couple of these. Like this one in particular is like a 0.5 Q. So it's a really wide boost. And so like it lifts it really subtly through the mids, kind of like peaking here around 8 to get a lot of that, like just that kind of focused frequency. And then I wanted to fairly quickly dip it back down and even out like my actual like very high, like 13, 15K and above. So it looks a little funky. It is a little funky, but it sounds good. So it's kind of like, you know, who cares? I'm gonna turn it off. So yeah, that's what that's doing. Last but not least, we have got Pro L, always a good one. I like finishing with this one. So style is modern, got like a tiny bit of look ahead. Attack at 275 milliseconds, release around 400. So transients are slightly delinked. And then just pushing to that, Josh wanted this pretty loud. He sent me some references that were pretty loud, and so I was like, yeah, I can get it there. So here is what that's doing. We'll kind of just watch this on the meter here. Okay, so that's some pretty aggressive processing there, and I'll be the first to admit that. It's definitely like, I don't know if I would have gone this loud ordinarily, but it sounded cool for the project, and I think it really kind of fit the vibe of the song. And yeah, just kind of went with it because I don't think it sounds like too crushed. But yeah, it's maybe a little more than I might ordinarily do on a mastering job. So I'm not always out there trying to get like, you know, those kind of super aggressive levels, but it's nice to know that like you can do that if you want to, especially with like this modern setting is incorporating some additional clipping as well. So it's not just straight limiting. So like a lot of like where that snare is going over, if you ran that as something like, you know, like a Waves, you know, L1 or L2, it's just going to like obliterate your mix. Whereas this is just kind of like clipping that off and letting the mix sort of stay unaffected and just clipping off the top of that snare. And I really like the way that sounds. I think it came out sounding really good, even though it is pretty dang loud. So with that, we've wrapped up a lot of the mastering stuff. We've kind of got our mix together. Now, up until this point, you've been hearing a lot of like the really big part of this song, but there is a lot more going on that I want to show you. I want to show you how versatile some of these sounds have to be. So at the beginning of the song, there's this. Which is so cool. And like we talked about a little bit, so I've got like the side stick kind of thing happening down here on its own track to process that separately. But how do we get the kick sounding, you know, less like metally and more kind of like that Anderson .Paak thing? So for that, what I've done, I've automated this EQ to come on. And basically this is just a low pass filter set up around like 1100 hertz. And when that kicks on, we get it sounding like this. So that really kind of takes care of a lot of that. And the great thing about all of Josh's samples in the sample pack is that they have like so many velocities, so many round robins. Like when he's kicking it, you know, like softer like that, is triggering those softer samples, it sounds just so incredibly natural. I think like a lot of the, like not to like rag on anybody else's like sample pack or anything, but a lot of times those lower velocity samples are neglected and they're still really important. So we recorded like, I think it was like 12 velocities for like each of these, and you know, like 10, 15 round robins, like different hits for each one. So there's just a ton of samples in here that allows you to do stuff like that. Same thing on toms. Like, man, you got like some softer tom stuff going on, like, and you want to augment it with samples, you really need those samples to work well at lower velocities and not like just have the big hits. So that's something we really tried to go for with this pack. Then the same thing kind of happens again back over here. Let's check this section out. So This time we got the snare mix in as well. That's a whole other challenge. Let's go ahead and just solo that. And again, all that's really happening there is I'm automating this EQ to come on during that section, and it's putting a low cut or a high cut filter right there, and it's kind of just getting that vibe. And really, Josh's like dynamics and the fact that the samples sound really good at lower velocities are taking care of the rest of that. So it makes it really easy to do like super versatile stuff like that. Now, if you were interested in these samples, you've liked what you've heard on this mix, you can get them at joshmanueldrums.com. They are available for purchase there. They sound incredible. They come with like a full contact instrument, all the raw samples, like wave files, all the trigger files, processed, unprocessed, every single mic individually. It's so extensive of a sample pack. I'm super proud of it. I'm super pumped to like get it out to everybody. We've been working on these for quite a while. And I think they just sound so good. Like I've been using them all the time in my productions and in mixes that I've done. So if you're interested in that, definitely go check it out. I know you're gonna love them. So also, if you like this mix walkthrough, drop a like, subscribe to the channel. We'll be doing more of these for other songs, other playthroughs that Josh is doing. So you'll see some more stuff like this, and some different samples, different everything, different mixing techniques being incorporated into those. So if you like that kind of stuff, stick around for that, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.